to welcome to the first session.
Oh, you don't need to do that quite yet.
Okay.
Well, let me get Peter and Fanny in the room, and then we haven't let anyone in yet, so we don't have to quite really do anything like that. Let me get a second.
No.
Okay. Okay, and then we have Fanny. Hold on. All right, here we go, guys. Thank you both so much.
You bet.
Okay, everybody, let's be ready to choose your language. Okay, now you should be able to see that globe, and you should be choosing your language.
OK, interprétation. Moi, je vais mettre en ce moment-là français. Hop. No.
Well, I'm here. I chose English, and I'm not hearing you. No, you can go back in there and change the language. Yes, you can change it as much as you want.
Je ne vois pas le globe.
Okay, okay.
Là, je ne sais pas où aller.
Aaron, did you activate the interpretation? Because I don't see a globe either.
It should be in the toolbar. You might need to press the More button on your toolbar. It might be that your toolbar is shrunk, and you might need to press the More button and expand it. It might be in there.
OK, c'est bon. Alors, moi, je clique sur français, interprétation, ou sur anglais?
Mm-hmm.
Normalement sur français.
Alors, moi, je vais faire français.
Normalement, oui. N'est-ce pas, Peter?
Bon, je viens de faire français.
Okay, I'm going to let people in. So the curtain is being opened. We will enjoy this session. Thank you, folks, and your patience with my choppy audio.
Is everybody seeing the interpretation?
Good morning, everyone.
Button?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. We're just filling the room. Give us a minute. Thank you all for joining us. I know it's early. We'll give folks a little extra time to fill the room.
Moi, je vous entends très bien. Merci.
So I'm not seeing the interpretation button.
Well, you're a co-host. It should be, again, if you have to expand your More, if you need to expand your toolbar, you should see it. It is enabled. Folks, welcome. We are doing a little technical backflip today. Welcome to plant breeding session number 1. This is So You Want to Be a Plant Breeder. My name is Heron Breen. I am really just doing the introduction today. I reside up in Central Maine. And what we're doing today is we have the great services of Fanny Poirier and Peter Feldstein as translators. And what we need you to do is on your toolbar for Zoom, you should find a small globe. In that small globe, you're going to want to select your language of choice, English or French. So this is a dual conversation that's taking place. So please take a moment, find the toolbar, find the globe, and select your language of choice. Hugo, do you want to say that in French or something to that effect?
Bonjour, bienvenue tout le monde. Il faut d'abord choisir votre interprétation. Donc, vous pouvez choisir français ou anglais en cliquant sur un globe qui est en bas de qui est dans la barre à outils de Zoom, en bas de votre écran. Et vous pouvez sélectionner français ou anglais.
Hugo, did you end up finding yours, just as a check-in?
I haven't, no.
Uh-oh. Oh, no. Well, a good thing you're bilingual. It may be that there could be certain versions of Zoom that might not have it. That could be the issue. While everybody is finding this globe, selecting language, Peter has also put in the chat in French instructions to do the same. Okay. Just so you know, this session is being recorded, and we're going to do a quick intro, some intro slides before I hand it over to Kristen, Loria, and Hugo Martorell for moderation today. So thank you. This is the third collaboration between the NOFA New York Winter Conference and the Northeast Organic Seed Conference. We've been doing this for this is a sort of 7th year of being in talks and working together, and it's been going really great. Now, next slide. These are our community agreements. So these are the types of rules, conversation styles that we're hoping to follow to be mindful and respectful. First one to be really clear about, is one mic, is that one of us is speaking at a time, particularly in Zoom. Also, avoiding jargon. So jargon are things like acronyms or maybe scientific terms that are not in the layperson's vocabulary. So taking time to explain those is very important. Be patient. This is a new platform for all of us. Things are going to come up. Audio problems are going to come up. You might get booted. We might get booted. So, just be patient. We'll figure it out. Next slide. I would also like us all to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on land that was managed, is managed, and will be managed and inhabited by our indigenous community. And this has been going on for thousands of years before European colonization and genocide. Please take a moment to find your own location on the map on that slide. And that will sort of expand to a greater place. If you're coming from someplace other than the Northeast, you can see the folks in your area. Please let's take a moment of silence in respect and appreciation for our indigenous community. Especially given that today we're speaking about genetics and speaking about seeds, we also need to be extra mindful. We're also very blessed to have the In Living Color virtual Black Indigenous Person of Color space facilitated by Amanda David and Madonna Bushi. They have 24-hour access available by email, and if you'd like to schedule an appointment or some social and community support time, please be in touch with them. Thank you. We've had some great keynotes. Laura Legnick spoke on Saturday. Banu Sabrabaniam is speaking on Thursday night, and that looks to be a really great session with some good interaction. And Brian Caldwell will be speaking on Saturday. Next slide. We also have some University of Vermont note takers with us today. They'll be doing a community mapping exercise. Would love to have you take part. They've put a blurb in the chat regarding this. These notes are not going to include any personal or identifiable information, but they will be informing this needs assessment that will be taking place on Sunday. Next slide. This needs assessment on Sunday, January 24th is accessible through a free session link that's within the blurb that the folks just placed in the chat. That's the only way to get into it. It's a post-conference event, but we're inviting you all to come together, take stock and build a new table. This work is not all about setting new places at a table. Truthfully, it's mostly about building a new table. And if those note takers from UVM would identify themselves in the chat, that'd be great. Thank you, MeNote, for doing that. I will also be posting some links to the Society of Organic Seed Professionals. They've invited anyone. It's open to folks, even those who aren't members, to come to a free mixer social hour. This will be on Thursday evening around 8 p.m. following the keynote. It's a sort of a registration link that I'll be putting in the chat. Okay, thank you very much. And I'll be handing this over to Hugo and Kristen. Thank you so much, Hugo and Kristen.
Hi, everyone. So what a pleasure to be your co-facilitators here today with Kristen. My name is Hugo. I'm joining in from Montreal, Jojage in Quebec on the Canadian side. Kristen, where are you joining in today?
Hi, everyone. I am a graduate student at Cornell University, joining you from Ithaca, New York.
So as a first icebreaker for the participants today, I will be launching a small poll to know who is in the room. Please take a minute to answer the poll questions, and then I'll be sharing the results. So the first question is, from which region are you joining from today? Dans quelle région êtes-vous aujourd'hui? And what of the best terms describes you? Lequel de ces mots vous décrit le mieux? And finally, in terms of plant breeding, which of the crops most interests you the most? Quelle est la culture qui vous concerne, qui vous intéresse le plus en ce qui concerne la sélection végétale? Kristen, do you want to say a few words about the Plant Breeders Day and the session today?
Yes, definitely. So, like Hugo said, we welcome you to the first session of Plant Breeding Day here at the Northeast Organic Seed Conference. And this session will kick off with some plant breeding stories to get you inspired and thinking about your own plant breeding dreams. And then followed by session 2 at 2 p.m., 2 p.m. Eastern, that is, which will continue with how to source germplasm. And finally, at 4 p.m., we will explore in our third session what to do with that new variety that you've created. And we might be a bit biased, but we think that this is a unique opportunity here at the Northeast Organic Seed Conference to bring together plant breeders of all stripes, from formally trained geneticists to farmers and gardener breeders, to share stories and learn from each other. And so we hope that the message of the day will really be that anyone can be a plant breeder, and whether we are at a public university, working for a regional seed company, or just hanging out in our backyards, the more of us that are selecting and creating new varieties on their farms and gardens across the Northeast, the more richer and more resilient our farming systems and our communities will be as we move into the future. So with that, Hugo is going to report back on our poll results.
Thank you, Kristen. So I'm going to end poll right now. We have 39 out of the 49 people who've answered, and I will share results. As you can see, people are coming from different regions, whether in the US or the Canadian side. That we have about 14 market gardeners, 5 seed companies, 4 professional breeders. And there's a kind of a wide range of crops people are interested in. Today's session, we have 3 amazing presenters. Richard Favreau is coming from Eastern Quebec, and he will be sharing about leek and shallot selection on his farm. We have Solveig, who was in Wisconsin-Madison, where she did some beet breeding, and now she's in BC, so she'll be sharing about her beet breeding and participatory plant breeding work there. And finally, we'll have Michael Bloss from Cornell, who will be sharing about his work on cucumbers in the cucurbit family. So we have the presentations are going to be between 10 to 14 minutes with options for Q&A via the chat. And so if you have any questions during the presentations, you can just write them in the chat. And after each 2 presentations, hopefully we'll have some time for some conversation about mentoring new breeders and hopefully new breeders sharing their questions, etc. I really want to thank Harren and all the NOFA team for hosting this session today, and thank you all for joining in. So without further ado, I will ask Richard to share his presentation, share his screen, and share his presentation.
One moment, Hugo, just for the late arrivals before we begin. Please, you'll find at the bottom of your or on your Zoom toolbar, you should find a globe function. This is a dual translated workshop and it's French English, and your job here is to go to that globe and select the language of your choice in which you would want to hear these presentations, French or English. So before Richard starts, please everyone take a moment to do that. Richard, thank you for that apologize for that interruption.
Thanks, Harren, for the reminder.
Go ahead, folks.
Richard, à toi.
Ah. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien? Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Yeah, we can hear you, Peter.
Yes,
bon?
we can hear you, Richard.
OK, alors je vais commencer. Bonjour tout le monde, merci de m'avoir invité. Je vais vous parler de la production de semences de poireaux et d'échalotes françaises à la ferme Val-aux-Vents, à Saint-Valérien-de-Rimouski. Excusez-moi. OK, voilà. J'opère la ferme Val-aux-Vents depuis 1996. Nous sommes situés dans le nord-est du Québec, dans une région très froide. Nous avons seulement 115-120 jours sans gel. On produit des légumes sur environ 1 hectare pour les paniers et puis des chefs. Je fais ça avec ma conjointe Monique Michaud que vous voyez en bas. Est-ce que ça va pour l'affichage? Oui. Alors, je fais de la production de semences de poireaux depuis 20 ans et j'ai commencé les semences d'échalotes 5 ans plus tard. Tout d'abord, on a travaillé pour remplir les besoins de la ferme et depuis 2010, on a commencé à offrir nos semences aux jardiniers via la Société des plantes du Kamouraska. La production de semences, excusez-moi, la production de semences en région froide représente un défi car nous ne sommes pas dans une région traditionnelle pour la production de semences de poireaux et d'échalotes. Il y a très peu de maturation de semences sur le pied. On ne voit pas les graines noires au moment de la récolte. Alors, il faut étendre la saison. Comment? C'est en récoltant les hampes complètes et les suspendant pendant environ 10 semaines. Il faut que le séchage soit très lent pour permettre une maturation post-récolte. La sélection du poireau s'est faite à partir d'un... Excusez-moi. La sélection des poireaux s'est faite à partir d'un cultivar qui s'appelle Unique en 1998. On l'a sélectionné pour la survie à l'hiver, le fût allongé, la chair à grains très fins, la base non bulbeuse et puis pour le rendement. C'est un poireau qui a été très apprécié par les consommateurs. D'ailleurs, elle a été retenue par l'opération Gardien de semences qui met en lien les semenciers, les producteurs et les chefs. Pour l'échalote française, on a sélectionné pour la question de la conservation, car il faut conserver les bulles pendant tout l'hiver pour produire des graines l'année suivante, pour la couleur et pour la forme. C'est une échalote de type Jersey aux briques très élevées et qui a des très bonnes aptitudes à la caramélisation. Elle est très appréciée par les chefs. Aussi, sa saveur est vraiment distincte des autres échalotes qui sont sur le marché. Elle ne rappelle pas celle de l'oignon. Au fil des sélections, il a fallu se débarrasser par sélection négative, roguing, d'un syndrome jaune pâle qui affectait les jeunes semis ou les feuilles qui émergent des bulbes. Il y a 2 ans, on a voulu ouvrir le marché des maraîchers commerciaux. Par contre, étant producteur, on sait très bien que les maraîchers commerciaux sont habitués à utiliser des cultivars hybrides. Ils sont souvent déçus par les cultivars à pollinisation libre, notamment pour le taux de germination, surtout pour la vigueur des semis, aussi pour l'uniformité, la précocité, la résistance et le rendement. On se posait la question si nos semences étaient prêtes. Alors, il a fallu faire un diagnostic. Des maraîchers commerciaux qui collaborent avec nous ont souligné le manque de vigueur de nos semences en bas âge. En 2018, on a fait un essai de poireaux d'hiver et on s'est rendu compte que notre poireau Val-aux-Vents, se comportait malgré tout assez bien. Moins que King Richard, mais mieux que unique. Pourtant, notre variété vient de ce cultivar unique. Donc, on avait quand même bien conservé. Pour l'échalote française, on a fait un essai sur 2 fermes, un essai structuré pour comparer l'échalote française Val-aux-Vents à un hybride commercial. Là, on s'est rendu compte qu'il restait beaucoup de travail à faire parce que l'échalote Val-aux-Vents avait un rendement qui était moins de la moitié de Camelot. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? C'est que l'échalote Val-aux-Vents avait beaucoup d'individus trop faibles, trop petits, moins résistants au ver gris ou à la fusariose. Ça nous a apporté à faire pas mal de lectures sur l'oignon. Et puis, il faut comprendre que notre seule façon de trier les semences était le tri par immersion, qui, en fait, c'est un tri de densité, et que ça, c'est bon pour avoir un taux de germination suffisant. Mais selon la littérature, c'est que ça valait la peine de rajouter un tri pour la grosseur, un tri volumétrique. Parce que avoir des semences plus grosses permet d'augmenter non seulement le taux de germination, mais surtout la vigueur des semis. La vigueur des semis accrus permet une meilleure résistance aux conditions adverses et des rendements accrus. C'est ce que la littérature nous dit. Quel tamis avons-nous utilisé? Premièrement, il faut comprendre qu'on fait le tamisage des semences après le tri par immersion. Les 2 tamis sont le tamis 1,5 mm qui permet de se débarrasser des semences qui sont viables, celles qui ont calé, mais qui sont trop petites, qui risquent de manquer de vigueur. Le tamis 2 mm, lui, va permettre de conserver les plus grosses semences. On l'utilise pour l'échalote. C'est un tamis trop gros pour le poireau. Et ça nous donne aussi des graines qui sont entre les 2 tamis, des graines moyennes qui vont rester à vérifier. Elles sont parfois bonnes, parfois pas. Donner une idée du résultat du tamisage. Avant le tamisage dans le poireau, on a 400 semences au gramme. Après le tamisage, 1,5 mm, on obtient 300 semences au gramme. Vraiment un meilleur calibre. Pour l'échalote, les taux passent de 350 semences au gramme à 250 semences au gramme. Dans les 2 cas, on remarque qu'il y a quand même un gros taux de rejet. Pour le poireau, 40 %. Pour l'échalote, le rejet est de 15 à 65 %. 15 à 65 %, pourquoi cette variation-là? Parce que la catégorie moyenne est parfois bonne, parfois pas. Voici pour le tamisage. Voici un graphique qui donne l'effet de dimension, du calibre de la semence sur la germination. On s'aperçoit que le gros calibre, en la ligne bleue, germe plus rapidement et atteint un meilleur pourcentage de germination. Par contre, il y a une autre façon d'améliorer le calibre, en plus du tamisage. selon la littérature, utiliser des gros bulbes mères génère plus de semences et un plus fort calibre. On a fait un essai en 2019. On a fait champ petit bulbe avec des bulbes de 40 grammes contre tunnel gros bulbe. Les semences produites en tunnel à partir de gros bulbes ont donné 230% plus de semences, imputables 200% en nombre de graines et 10% au niveau du calibre. On a testé ces graines-là et on s'aperçoit que les tunnels venant du tunnel gros bulbe, ce sont les lignes jaunes et rouges, germent mieux tant en pourcentage qu'en rapidité. C'est vraiment mieux que les semences produites en champ à partir de petits bulbes. C'est pointé avec la flèche. Soit en passant, en 2020, on a fait aux semences avec des gros bulbes, mais en champ. Et les résultats ont été intermédiaires. Donc, il y a vraiment la combinaison tunnel et gros bulbes dans nos régions nordiques donne vraiment des très bons résultats. Voici une vue de la production de semences en tunnel. C'est à gauche. Maintenant, quel est l'effet du calibre de la semence sur le rendement? Pour le poireau, avant qu'on fasse le tamisage, on avait un rendement habituel de 200-250 grammes à l'unité, une fois paré. Et avec le tamis, cette moyenne a monté à 325 grammes. On a eu une nette amélioration de rendement. Pour l'échalote française, le tamisage de millimètres a vraiment amélioré le rendement de l'échalote Val-aux-Vents. Avant, en 2019, avec des graines plus petites, on avait un rendement qui était moins de la moitié que de celui de camelot. Tandis qu'en 2020, après le tamisage, l'écart s'est vraiment diminué. Et maintenant, Val-aux-Vents a un rendement de 85% de celui de l'hybride camelot. Nous avons fait une nette amélioration de cette façon-là. Quel est le rendement de la production de semences à la ferme Val-aux-Vents? Pour le poireau, on récolte 1,9 à 2,5 grammes par plant. C'est vraiment pas beaucoup, c'est pas payant. Il faut vraiment améliorer ça. On pense à utiliser un pays thermique ou même à introduire la production de semences de poireaux en tunnel. Pour la semence d'échalote française, le résultat est éloquent. C'est qu'en produisant en tunnel gros bulbe, on a atteint 6,2 grammes par bulbe. C'est vraiment meilleur que les autres façons. Et cette année, on veut utiliser un pays thermique en plus de ça, pour voir si on ne peut pas augmenter le rendement. Alors, je vais conclure ici, c'est qu'à la ferme de Val-aux-Vents, en faisant le tri de densité, plus le tri de volume, plus la production de graines en gros bulbes en tunnel, ça a permis d'augmenter notre récolte de semences, le calibre, la vigueur et le rendement. Il nous reste plusieurs questions. Est-ce que l'utilisation de bulbes issus de grosses semences favorise la production d'un plus gros taux de grosses semences? Quelle est la part de la génétique? Quelle est la part des conditions de croissance pour déterminer le calibre des semences? Jusqu'où l'augmentation du calibre des semences à pollinisation libre peut-elle compenser pour la vigueur des semences hybrides? Est-ce que c'est possible? Enfin, question bien terre à terre pour le semencier, c'est qu'on sait que le tamisage implique beaucoup de rejets de semences. Où se retrouve le point d'équilibre entre la qualité optimale des semences et le revenu du producteur de semences? Et voilà, je vous remercie sur une petite image de semences. J'ai terminé.
Merci, Richard.
Alors, je vais départager mon écran.
Richard,
Okay.
I have 2 questions coming in from the chat. The first one is when you refer to big bulbs, are you referring to larger plants or the larger bulb of the plant? I think the question is for the shallots. So I think the answer is when you refer to big bulbs, you're talking about the big bulbs of the shallots, correct?
Le bulbe. C'est vraiment des bulbes plus gros. Là, maintenant, j'utilise des semences, des bulbes d'échalotes de 75-80 grammes. Pour le poireau, je n'ai pas fait le poids, mais je fais toujours, normalement, c'est le 50% des poireaux qui est le plus gros dans le champ. Et sain, bien sûr. Il faut que ce soit sain. La taille de semences, je l'ai vu vraiment beaucoup pour les tests de germination et je l'ai vu aussi pour le rendement en champ. Ça répond à la deuxième question du chat.
So for the question from Elena, what is the effect of seed size of crop yield? Is the effect of seed size on crop yield or seed yield? I think he's talking in this case about crop yield. But that also entails seed yield for seed production as well. Correct, Richard?
Je n'ai pas bien compris.
La question, c'était, vous dites qu'il y a un effet de la taille des semences sur le rendement des cultures ou sur le rendement en semences?
Les deux. Both. It does have a positive effect on both.
So the seed, the size of the seed will have an effect on the size of the bulbs. Thank you, Richard.
C'est ça, à la fois sur la production de semences, à la fois sur la récolte d'échalotes, par exemple.
Thank you, Richard, for your deep dive into regional adaptation and seed screening to answer market gardeners' needs. Kristen, was there any last comments for Richard, or should we switch to Solveig's presentation?
It looks like that was the only question. We had a comment from Natasha that discarded onion family seeds are a popular spice to grind in her community. So that's a tip for what to do with all those smaller seeds that you screen out, which is great. All right, moving on.
Thank you, Kristen. And Natasha, if you want to share a recipe on the chat, be my guest. Solveig, would you like to share your screen with us?
Sure thing. Okay, is that showing up? Is that showing up for everybody?
It needs yeah, it's showing up.
Perfect.
All yours.
Okay, great, thank you. My name's Solveig Hanson. I just graduated from the University of Wisconsin at Madison with a doctorate in plant breeding and genetics. As part of that work, I developed some novel beet varieties using participatory techniques, which is why I've been asked to join you today. But since this program is also about becoming a plant breeder, I thought I would start with my story of how I found this field, so to speak. Let's see, there we go. I grew up in Southwest Wisconsin. I was an outdoor kid. I went to college, caught the farming bug, and then spent 8 seasons as co-owner of an organic vegetable farm in Iowa. I found the seed world when a customer care job at Harris Seeds in Rochester, New York turned into an organic product manager position. As a farmer, I was very aware of differences among varieties, but as a product manager, I got to observe them systematically. I still, though, didn't have much idea of how those differences got there. And then came an organic seed school attached to the Student Organic Seed Symposium in 2012, the very first one. And that day, I was introduced to concepts of plant reproductive biology, population creation, and selection in terms that I could understand. And I realized that I could do this too. It was coming time in my life for a move back toward home in Wisconsin. So I made some contacts with UW plant breeding faculty and went back to start prerequisite classes, not knowing whether I would have a place eventually as a graduate student. So I share this not only to illustrate the way personal and professional lives intertwine and co-develop, but also to acknowledge that my story has been shaped by several privileged identities, probably most prominently white racial identity and upper middle class status. Those identities have shaped my emotional and intellectual landscape, my ability to make money and fail to make money, the questions I ask in this presentation that I'm about to give you. So I welcome your feedback and insights about the ways you see my identities reflected in this work. And I'm so gratified that the organic plant breeding community and seed community continues to probe these connections between our cultures, our identities, and the plants that we interact with. After I found plant breeding, I found beets, and I found them through a person, Dr. Erwin Goldman at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who invited me to join his lab. Beets were appealing to me for two reasons. First, because they're widely grown in Wisconsin, both for processing, but especially among organic growers for direct market. And they're having a moment. Beets were introduced to North America by European settlers, but they were considered a humble food. Lately though, beet has become iconic, I would say, of farm to table culture. So I thought it held particular potential for engagement. Not least of which because people have opinions on beets. It's generally agreed that there are four prominent flavor attributes to beet: sweet, earthy, bitter, and harsh. But the earthy flavor is the one that is most associated with either preference or non-preference, either beets tasting like dirt or tasting like dirt candy. The earthy aroma in table beet is caused by this molecule called geosmin. Geosmin is produced by a wide variety of bacteria and fungi. It is the aroma of freshly turned earth, and humans are very sensitive to it. It was historically assumed that beets had this earthy aroma because they grow in the soil. However, beets grown in sterile tissue culture and also in heat sterilized soil still produce geosmin. And recurrent selection, both for and against geosmin, was successful, showing heritability for this trait. So this means that geosmin is probably produced by the beet itself. And we know we can breed for different levels of geosmin, even higher and lower than we've experienced before. And serendipitously, this project left me with varieties of populations of beets segregating brilliantly for color and quite different in geosmin concentration, which were perfectly, they were a perfect starting material for participatory plant breeding. Because they're well suited for markets that value diversity and value variability and novelty. So I used a participatory approach for a couple of reasons. First, because I wanted to make something that worked on organic farms and for organic farmers marketplaces. So I got participatory plant breeding let me select in the target environment and with the consumers and farmers who would actually be growing and eating these things. And also I wanted to engage with people. It just makes me happy. And both stakeholder engagement and open knowledge exchange are core principles of the organic community. So with the goal of developing consumer accepted specialty beet cultivars adapted to Wisconsin organic farms, I used two different participatory breeding models. The first one was a single farm model in which the farmers, staff, and CSA members of a single farm served as all of my participants for both farm selection and then taste selection. And then the outreach model drew farmer input from a survey of farmers in Wisconsin And then chefs and consumers convened by the farm, or the farm Seed to Kitchen Collaborative, which is an organization convened by the horticulture department at Madison, Wisconsin. They provided the taste input for the outreach model. So for the first two cycles of selection, this cycle was used. We started with 30 families of high geosmin beets, 30 families of low geosmin beets. A half sib family in beet means all the seed that comes off a single plant. So for each seed from that plant, one gamete is contributed by the pollen receiving parent, and the other gamete is contributed by one of many pollen parents. So you can see that some families are eliminated at each step of selection, and I'll describe that, but we're left with 5 of the original 30 families to intermate and make the starting population for the following cycle. Horticultural selection was carried out by farmers. So in the farm model, I just talked to Steve Pincus right here about what he wanted to see in a beet that he grew. I asked these same questions via survey for the outreach model. You might not be surprised that high priorities were germination, ability to outcompete weeds, and disease resistance. I made a selection index that weighted ratings for those traits by farmer priorities, but then I also just made qualitative notes on each family that I evaluated. Both were helpful, and I eliminated about a third of families from the original 30 for performance on the farm. Next, I sorted the remaining families using color to give us something more manageable to choose between. And next we moved on to hedonic selection, or basically selection for how much do you want to eat this again. The core tasters, which were the farm staff and the chefs, got 4 groups to choose from. The 2 they liked the most advanced to consumer tasting. The consumers got 2 high and 2 low geosmin groups to choose from. They picked 1 of each, and that was advanced for seed propagation. Interestingly, in very few cases did we find significant differences in preference at selection time. That could be because there were very few measurable differences in flavor. In a couple cases, we had differences in geosmin, but in most cases, the groups were not different within the high and low geosmin groups. But we also found no difference between high geosmin and low geosmin groups in terms of liking taken together. So despite people's strong opinions on what they feel about the earthy flavor in beet, we didn't see strong differences according to geosmin level in liking. The big differences we did see were in appearance liking when we compared all white beet groups to pigmented beet groups. So just based on appearance, people tended to like the pigmented groups much more, on the order of 80% to 25%. However, when we then asked how much do you want to eat this again, the results were almost equal, and in one case, the white beet even won. Interestingly, so this is called positive disconfirmation of expectations, or getting more than you think you're going to get. And both of the white varieties were selected by the chefs that we worked with, which I think is particularly interesting because chefs are professionals at not only creating food, but creating expectations around food. And they have an intuitive feel for what might set up a surprising or interesting flavor experience for their consumers. So they're great to involve in the breeding process if that works for your context. So what we came up with, after 2 cycles of the selection process, the visual phenotypes were set, and we continued to select for, refining root shape, etc. These 2 cultivars are released under these names. Snow Globe has more geosmin than Evansville Ember, but both have quite low levels. However, there are many commercial cultivars with geosmin concentration in this range. So they don't represent novelty with respect to geosmin. They do respect novelty in the fact that they were that they resulted from participatory selection in an organic environment. In contrast, the high geosmin selections do represent novelty in geosmin concentration. The two OP cultivars that we can generally count on to be pretty high in geosmin are Bull's Blood and Chioggia, and these are substantially higher than that. You'll see also some distinctive visual phenotypes. So there's a white beet with a pink petiole, and then these two zoned populations, moving target with more pigment in general and also more coral pigment. So all of these varieties, high-end, low geosmin, are being trialed by seed companies right now and by farmers through the Seed to Kitchen Collaborative. And we're getting some good feedback. And, you know, with any luck, they could end up in seed catalogs in another couple of years. So I'll end up, I wrote and discarded many titles for this appreciation slide. And I'm just going to end with an appreciation for impermanence. Impermanence is inherent, of course, to the academic process and obviously in life in general. Impermanence is also inherent in our crops, especially these open pollinated crops that change with every seed to seed cycle. My graduate school experience gifted me with layers and webs of experiences, relationships, some of which will last a lifetime, some of which ended after a 2-minute beet tasting. There are worthy and complex discussions to have about ownership of, stewardship of, relationship with seeds and plants, and I'm excited to continue to be part of those. But I'll leave this with gratitude for the chance I had to change and be changed by these populations of beets over some years. So I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Solveig.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Actually, do you mind going back to your presentation and the last before slide where there's the different generations?
Yeah, sure.
Since we have a question here
great.
from Chris at Yonder Hill Farm, asking how many generations did it take to stabilize the varieties you've been working with?
Yeah, I will say that it continues to, the refinement continues, but that question really depends on the color. So color in beet is controlled by two major loci, the R and the Y loci. If both are recessive, you get white beets. So once they're both fixed at recessive, the white color is stable. So for Blushing Not Bashful, and can I go backwards here? There we go. And Snow Globe, they are white. And the petiole color is also generally set. For the zone populations, I did the selections this year before planting roots into the greenhouse right before I left Wisconsin, and was very intentional about selecting for more pigment in the moving target than the Evansville orbit. So those continue to diverge in a higher pigment zoned and lower pigment zoned beet. The Evansville Ember is, maybe the more humbling, or it's either humbling or it has unique potential. I thought it was more fixed for red color than it is. It continues to segregate for yellow and white roots, which is rotten if you want a red beet, and interesting if you're a seed company or an individual who wants to play with selecting your own assortment, or who likes to have a mixture of beets in your garden. And then as far as I would say that the root shapes and crown sizes and those things are becoming pretty stable and reproducible.
And when did you start this project?
Let's see. First season in the field was 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Chris was just iterating. I'm reading 3 cycles, meaning 3 generations, 6 years.
Oh, that's a great question. I forgot to say that. Right, so beets are biennial. If seed production takes place outside, indeed, it takes 2 years to take 1 generation. However, we have a greenhouse at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and so we we vernalize beets in a cooler from about beginning of September until beginning of December, and then plant the stecklings into a greenhouse and do seed production over the winter time. So we compress those 2 years into a 1 year cycle. So this is the 4th year of selection that just happened.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good
and Donna Direk, who seems to have grown some of these beets, was asking if you've ever worked with no bleed red beets.
Huh. I'm not familiar with that. Like betalains are the pigment in beet, and they're water soluble. I would be are there such things?
There are.
There are?
No bleed is a bit of an exaggeration.
Okay, but they bleed less, you're saying?
Yes.
Huh, that's a new one for me. I would love to hear more about that.
Some more conversation then on no bleed beets. I don't see other questions. Kristen,
Okay.
do you see anything else that I might have missed?
Oh, yeah, I think we missed one from Craig a little ways up, which says, since beet greens are often just as loved as the beets, did you look at all at attractiveness or yield of the greens? And is there any geosmin present in the greens? We eat them often and haven't noted it, but they do have a sweetish flavor to our palate.
Great questions. Yes, like we know that beet greens are not only, well, if you have a healthy beet green, it not only helps them sell at market because it's an indicator of freshness, but it's also obviously another food that you can eat. So definitely selected for leaf health, so just absence of disease. I didn't select for top flavor just because my plate was full, you know, like metaphorically and literally. But that's a very worthy endeavor, just like for greens flavor. Geosmin is present in beet greens, although at lower levels than in the roots. I tend to taste a lot of oxalate, which is, or oxalic acid, which can kind of give you that rough feeling in your mouth eating beet greens. I think some people seem to be less sensitive to that. That can also be cut by using vinegar or lemon juice or an acid when you cook them. But no, there's an entire world waiting for beet greens breeding, I feel.
If I might just jump in, I know that Patrice Fortier in Quebec and Telsing Andrews who was doing some breeding work next to Ottawa, had worked on crossing beets with the Beta maritima. So to have a perennial root beet with leafy greens. And I tried these leafy greens last summer, and it has a very like a sea salt, a maritime taste to it. So I think the person stewarding this population is based in Montreal. His name is Maxime. And so if some people are interested in perennial beet breeding, there's
I'm interested. I'd love to hear
great.
More. Yeah.
Fantastic. So if there's no other questions or comments for Solveig, I would just like to thank you, Solveig, for waking up early on the West Coast to share your experience and your journey.
Thank you.
So we had not to
go ahead.
To reverse course, but Rebecca had one last question that I think we have time for. So it says, who grows these beets for seed now? Can farmers buy seeds from any of these lines?
So right now the beets are being, they were trialed this season by several seed companies. A couple have licensed them. And I think maybe a couple more are thinking about it. I haven't talked with them about publicizing that. So I think I might wait and make sure they're for sure about commercializing them before I say so. But I hope in a couple of years, well, I hope that soon I can say more, and I hope that in a couple of years they make them into some catalogs. It would be really fun to see them in the world.
Thanks, Solveig. And for those who are interested in commercialization of new varieties, there's a session at 4 p.m. dedicated to that question. Michael, are you ready to show your presentation?
I sure am.
All right. The floor is yours. Thank you, Solveig, again.
Great. So can you confirm that you can see that, Hugo?
I cannot confirm. I cannot see it.
Okay. How about that? Now,
Loading up,
yeah,
and I can see the Cornell logo.
there we go.
Go ahead, Michael. Thank you.
Great. So we're going to shift gears from beets to cucumbers. So my name is Mike Glos. I currently work at Cornell University. I've worked here mostly for the last 20 plus years in a number of different agriculture research projects, but focusing on seed production, organic seed and disease resistance breeding for the last 10 to 15. I also, with my wife and daughter, we have a certified organic farm about a half an hour from Ithaca, New York. That's been in production since 1990, I guess certified since 98. So we do mixed livestock, vegetables, herbs, and a lot of plants. So that's my general background that brings me to this. So I got involved in breeding with this cucumber back in early 2000, actually after working for NOFA New York. This project comes out of a talk that the breeder here that I started working for, Molly Jean, spoke at a NOFA conference and was sort of really surprised that there are all these growers growing varieties that they liked a lot of qualities about them, but they didn't grow real well, even in organic systems. And she felt she had all these varieties literally sitting on the shelf that had many of the traits that they were looking for. But they were sitting on the shelf because the commercial seed companies that she worked with, at least, didn't have any interest in them. And so there was this disconnect. And from that initial presentation and meeting and collaboration, she started realizing, oh, she had a new audience she could reach out to and work with, and thus became a connection to start this project as well as many others. Connection both between her and NOFA New York, and then all the different parties involved. So we started this project, and one of the first project we started was with Boothby's blonde cucumber, and we were at a meeting up in Maine between lots of growers, seed producers, university type seed companies, and it came up that a lot of growers liked this variety, but they did definitely have challenges with it because it they loved its flavor and such, and its size and its uniqueness as far as what it looked like. It definitely was very susceptible to diseases. So it's this quandary of the consumer loves the product, but it's hard to for the grower to produce enough of it or make money out of it because it doesn't grow real well. And so we set about trying to, quote, improve this variety, not get rid of it by any means, but to come up with a additional variety that had some of the traits that people were looking for, and thus and add some from some modern cultivars. So we were looking at trying to keep what it looked like, but changing the yield, keeping the flavor, still making it early, adding resistances such as powdery mildew, and potentially other resistances that are in some of the more modern cucumbers. So we then crossed it to Marketmore 97, which is a variety developed at Cornell. It's in the Marketmore series. I think a lot of growers still grow Marketmore 76. It's a very, very, very common, and it's a cucumber that is adapted very widely. It's grown really all over the world. But this Marketmore 97 is a improved version of it. It's a little later than Marketmore 76, but it's got many stacked resistances in it, including powdery mildew. But as you can see, it looks nothing like the white cucumber that is Boothby's Blonde. It's green, it's long, it has white spines rather than black spines, it has really thick skin, and it just, you know, it tastes and looks like a normal cucumber. It's a great producing cucumber, but it's definitely not anything that's really unique. So we had our two parents, and then we need to find sort of a team. And so we had this team of trained breeders at Cornell that could do some of the initial crossing. We had greenhouses, we had an organic research farm, we had organic growers that we could link in with NOFA New York, and we had good connections there to help, you know, with the conception of this project as well as through the breeding and trialing. Seed companies, they would have to be on board and involved, because for this to not just end up on a shelf again, we'd have to make sure that they were interested in this variety and could help shape it as it went along. Nonprofits like NOFA New York and MOFCA provided a lot of those connections. And then we needed someone to sort of do the project, the sort of day-to-day work. And we found this grower with no breeding experience. And that was me, to come on and help with that. And really, I had no breeding experience, never taken a breeding class, no formal knowledge, but I had worked with all these partners before. I was very interested in it, and also had a grower's perspective. And so it was a fairly straightforward project as far as breeding goes. We took these two very different cucumbers, although they are both, they're not like, one's not like a wild type. So they're both, you know, culinarily good cucumbers, just with different traits. You can see in the picture there the foliage. We had done some inoculation for seeing different resistances, and you can see that there's powdery mildew on that Boothby's Blonde, and it's not on the Mark 197. And you can just see the difference in the clear difference between these two cucumbers. So we took them and we crossed them by growing them. I think the initial cross was done in a greenhouse, and we did a cross-pollination, and we got that first generation, the F1, basically a hybrid, and you can see it looks like a cucumber. I mean, to me, it looks like a pickler, fairly big one. That in itself would have been a good variety, but it's not what we're aiming for, because we were trying to, you know, get back to that Boothby's Blonde type. And you can see from a foliage perspective, these pictures were taken at the same time, showing that just this first cross, we were in our hybrid that we got, the foliage was much better, and as far as the resistance to diseases and such. And then this slide really shows us, if you start at the top and go down, each generation, and this is the cucumbers that are shown there are showing the segregation or lack of segregation as we went along. So at the top, you've got your Marketmore and Boothby. We crossed them and we made what looks like a pickle in the second there. And then in the F2, I could have put a lot of cucumbers there. We got a huge variation as expected. In that second generation is where you get to select for really what you're looking for, because you're going to get green cucumbers, you're going to get white ones, black spines, white spines, all different sizes. And so what we did, we used what's called a pedigree approach, whether in each generation, we just selected the ones that we wanted. We self-pollinated them in the field, saved that seed. The next generation, we planted it out. And as we went through each generation, we started having less and less segregation in each generation. And we ended up with basically 3 selections, because fairly early on, we saw, and this happens in almost all breeding projects, you're looking for just one thing, but you find more than one. So we started this split into 3 projects, looking for 3 different cucumbers. The bottom one was one that was very similar to Boothby's Blonde. And then the other ones, the middle one was a much longer one, kind of like a white Marketmore. And then the top one was somewhere in the middle as far as size and such. And there's a picture just showing how the foliage looks and how much improvement we've made. And throughout this whole process, we're always growing all the other generations. We're always growing side-by-side varieties that are commercially available to make sure that we were making the progress we wanted and not just creating something that already existed or going back and making something that was not as good. We ended up with basically 3 different varieties. And let's go back last slide. We also were continuing sending this seed out to growers who are growing it as part of some formal projects. So we were getting their feedback. We were sending it to seed companies that were growing it and giving their feedback. So we had this constant feedback loop. So we weren't just doing all the selecting ourselves, in a vacuum. We did end up with basically 3 different varieties that are now commercially available. One was salt and pepper, which is the sort of closest to a Boothby's. It's quite small. It's got the black spines, a lot more disease resistance, and is what we were sort of working for from the beginning. We also ended up with one called Silver Slicer, which is what I was describing as a white market more, but it does have much thinner skin. It's been noted for its flavor. And again, it also has those disease resistances that many white cucumbers don't. And then we had a third variety that's available from one seed company, Seeds of Change. It's that middle-sized one, a little plumper, not quite as long, longer than salt and pepper, but shorter than Silver Slicer. We definitely had some unexpected results. One is the Silver Slicer variety actually is sort of commercially more popular than the salt and pepper one that we were working on. But I'm quite happy that all 3 of them are commercially available and getting out there in the world. In our comparisons throughout the time, we were always looking for new white cucumbers that were available. And one of those that we found, we put in all our trials, ended up having excellent downy mildew resistance. And that one became the main source of resistance for downy mildew for breeding down the line. And now we have cucumbers from the program of Michael Mazurk that have really good downy mildew resistance to the new strains that are available. We also built some great relationships between all the parties. At this point, when we started, there was really very little trust between nonprofits, growers, and Cornell and Extension and such, mostly because a lot of the information coming out of the ivory towers was not supporting organic agriculture. So this helped, is one step in helping change that. It also got me really interested in breeding and hooked on breeding, and to start trying things like on our own farm, breeding things like onions and such. And this is just a project that I've been working on for the last, I think, dozen or more years, trying to make a red Cipollini onion, just from a one-off red one that came in our commercial seed. Just ending up on conclusions. Basically, we had this goal, but when any breeding project, what you're doing is being able to see what's actually happening and making changes along the way. As far as how long it took, cucumbers are fairly straightforward compared to a lot of different crops, and so we were able to bring in different traits and stabilize it fairly quickly. One between having a few greenhouse generations where we were able to do some screening and also increase in for seed, but mostly just because it's a fairly straightforward crop. And so within 5 years, we had a pretty stable, and then it did take at least another 7 to 10 years after that for the whole process of getting in the catalogs and actually getting some growers to start, trialing it themselves on a wider, on more farms, and actually, you start seeing, mentions of it and people really growing it. The involving so many people was really important as far as developing something I think that was successful and ended up being adopted. And we just also had a really good time doing it. And the whole interaction aspect of this was really super, to be able to work with so many different growers and see so many farms and also be seeing this variety and how it performed differently on all the locations. And lastly, this is just all the support that we got from all the individuals at Cornell, a lot of funding from USDA, especially the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We were one of the first organic grants that helped with this. The growers and the seed company and organizations like NOFA. And that's what I've got.
Thank you, Michael.
It's hard to get through all that in 15 minutes.
You did great. Actually, if you don't mind, can you go to the slide where we see the different generations of cucumbers that we liked? Yeah, and we can really see from Solveig and your presentation that plant breeding is a collective endeavor, and that we can all play a role to generate more diversity and new varieties. Since you talked about Bluethies Blonde, I just wanted to and one of the participants, Chris at Yonder Hill Farm, has been doing some seed saving on that variety, and so I just wanted to open the floor to Chris, just for them to share their experience of growing out Bluethies Blonde in maritime climate and doing 4 years of seed saving. Chris, can you activate your mic?
Sure. Yep. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We
Okay,
can hear
good.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for including me. I find, in Nova Scotia that it does perform really well, and I think that speaks to its heritage as a main coastal variety. I've definitely heard reports of it not doing well in heat and changes. Heron mentioned in the chat that I have found this changes in flavor. When it gets hot, it gets bitter. And we do have heat in the summer on our farm pretty regularly now, but find that it does work. We don't get as much humidity. I think maybe that's a contributing factor, but every time we've grown it, it's really thrived and produced lots of cucumbers and lots of seeds for us. So yeah, that's
Thanks,
my
Chris.
experience with it.
Are you doing some selection, some on-farm selection in the Maritimes with other crops as well?
Yeah, definitely with a number of crops. Yes, we've been selecting. The Boothby's Blonde kind of selects itself for us, it seems like. But with some of the other cucurbits, we have like paid and acorn squash that we've gotten to ripen 2 weeks to even a month earlier than originally. So yeah, we do quite a bit.
Awesome. Yeah, cucurbits can be a real challenge when with the isolation distances.
Yes, yeah, for sure. We're lucky to have a very isolated spot. So
great. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Oh, I can see that there's a few quick questions for Michael. What I see here is, let's start with Jason's question. What does the commercial seed production of Silver Slicer look like? Does each seed company that carries it grow their own seed, or does somebody make it available wholesale?
So it kind of varies. So basically, the way, in a real nutshell, with Cornell, a company would license a variety from Cornell to do seed production. Then that company would do the seed production and market the seed. In the case of Silver Slicer, I'm not sure how many companies have a license to that variety, but I do know there are some currently situations where one company has a license to it. They do all the seed production, but then they also resell that seed to several different companies that then have it in their catalog. So you may see Silver Slicer in 6 catalogs, but it actually may be all grown from the same company that then is reselling it through those other outlets. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Yep.
If Jason, you need any more information, you can just ask in the chat. Craig has a question for you, Michael. Is it clear which diseases your varieties are resistant or tolerant to?
Really good question. So the main reason we grew this on our organic farm, and also all the participating farms were organic, was to make sure, even if we didn't know what was making it do so well, we were at least it was being subject to the diseases that these growers would more likely have. And since we had many different growers involved in many different fields, we were able to probably have it being grown under all those different diseases, even if every grower didn't get every disease every year. So to answer your question specifically, we definitely knew about powdery mildew. Some of the other ones we didn't necessarily know. And Marketmore has, I mean, a whole laundry list of resistances, and I'm sure some of those transferred over and some of them didn't, partly because many of those resistances in Marketmore are for production cucumber farms that don't do a lot of rotation and build up, end up having all sorts of diseases that organic farmers don't have. And so my guess is the programmer, Michael Mazurk, has a better idea of what resistances were maintained, or at least some more of them. But the main one is powdery mildew.
Thanks, Michael. And another question is by Jennifer Williams. Thank you, Jennifer. Was flavor criteria? How do the 3 new varieties compared in flavor with the original 2?
Good. So flavor is incredibly subjective. All you have to do is read a seed catalog, and everyone has a different sense of what something tastes like. I can tell you, and also the stage at which you eat it really varies. So the salt and pepper variety that we developed was named that because it did have a little spice sort of to it, maybe a peppery flavor. The silver slice, or the longer one, is mild, quite mild, and not. It can get to a fairly large size and not be bitter. And then I was truthfully less involved in the platinum variety, and I think it tastes more sort of like a regular Marketmore cucumber and such.
Thank you, Michael. So I think we've gone over the questions for Michael. Is that correct, Kristen?
Elena asked, how many years did it take from start to finish?
Sure. The first cross was made in 2001 and 2002. We were trialing varieties on farms by 2004. Within probably between 5 or 6 years from the beginning, there was stuff, very closely working with seed companies. I think it was probably around 2009 or 10 that it was in seed companies, I think. And really, then it took the rest of, probably 6 or 7 years for it to really start getting, more widely available.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so there's this time period of breeding, and then there's this time period of making it available, getting it popular, and having it consumers and farmers access to it. So we have 12 precious minutes ahead of us. And since I don't see any questions directed to the 3 speakers, I would really try to ask the speakers, the participants in this call might be people with no trained or professional background in plant breeding, whether they're students or researchers or farmers or gardeners. And some of the challenges when starting plant breeding is nailing down your goal and what you're breeding for. And and matching that with the resources you have available for you, whether that's people you know, farmers, mentors, greenhouse space, like in Solveig's case of doing 2 years in one for the beets, or land. And so I was hoping that you could just, one by one share about maybe some personal advice about, how do we nail down these goals with the resources at hand, and that can be a backyard in the city, and what kind of resources, information you would like to share. One aspect that I've heard by my friends in Quebec has been track keeping software, so keeping track of your populations, the agronomic performance, the taste, so how you're keeping track of so much information. So yeah, how do we pare down breeding goals and match that with resources and any kind of information, resources, and that you would like to share, like software to keep track of your populations. And I will share the NOFA Plant Breeders Guide for Farmers from Rowan White and another gentleman. So I'll put that in the chat. Solveig, what I see you nodding, and why don't you start?
Sure. Let's see. I'm nodding just because I'm an active listener. That's just habit. But I guess, okay, so I'd say realize that you don't have to get a doctorate in plant breeding to breed plants. Like understanding some basic principles can take you a really long way. I got started that day at the Organic Seed School, put on with the Student Organic Seed Symposium. Organic Seed Alliance has a lot of really great training materials, webinars, handbooks. And also I've found folks in the organic plant breeding community just very open. Ask somebody who's working on the crop you're interested in, get some practical advice about population size. I guess that issue of matching your goal, the crop you're interested in, and what you'd like to see it do with the resources you have is an important one. Like there are cases you need a certain population size to prevent inbreeding depending on the crop you're working on, and just kind of like making sure you've got the amount of land you need to grow the population size you need to be able to make effective selections is going to help you. And if you need to, collaborate with other people or for resources, greenhouses, etc. I'll let other folks talk.
Not to interrupt the flow here, Heron, you have your hand up. Did you want to say something? Maybe that was an accident. I don't know.
Not an accident. More just a question, or I don't know, just a thing about Richard's presentation, which I just want to note for everybody. In seed production and even hybrid seed production, it's not uncommon for 20 to 50% of the seed to be eliminated in the seed cleaning process. So the thing that Richard is sharing is some of the secrets to, number one, why hybrid seed, it's not just the genetics and the heterosis, the vigor, it is also this extreme seed selection, which also makes it reliable and germinate basically uniformly. That's kind of one of those elements. Uniform germination has this amazing thing, which allows those plants to uniformly access nutrients at the same time and sort of get adapted to their environment quickly. But I want to just backtrack to this element of like what is going on. There's some elements that most of us don't always think about. One is the formation of the endosperm in the seed, which is basically in OPs, an element of each plant being itself not a clone, it is not inbred. So in an OP, these are individuals, and when individuals cross, they create a small amount of this genetic vigor heterosis. Whereas when a plant crosses with itself or another individual in the population that it's not viable with, the endosperm, which is actually a second pollination. There are two, I should say pollination, there are two basically sperm cell and egg cell things that occur during pollination. And the endosperm itself, that trait of quickly forming endosperm and that seed ripening that Richard is explaining in the season, and that contributing to a better plant, is a genetic trait. It is not, it is something that is really key about when we say select the best in our OPs, and it carries over into all breeding. So we often don't think of this formation of endosperm as a key component of what makes a variety good or perform, or what makes seed good, nor do we often think of it directly in selection, but it's really an inherent undertone of why someone will constantly say, this is a good variety and a reliable seed producer. So there's a lot of depth there. And I just want to say that what Richard was showing is actually like an incredible proof of some of this, both genetic as well as performative relationships in OP populations with sort of inbreds versus variety, you know, basically creating a OP variety, maintaining it in a way that maintains and sifts out inbred seed, as well as promotes genetic depth. So I apologize for going on, but like it's mind-blowing what Richard is actually showing. And I just want to uplift that so everybody understands like there's a lot there we should pay attention to.
Thanks, Aaron. Richard, I don't know if you have any comments you want to make to that, or to my original question around, you know, any advice for new plant breeders who are looking at nailing down their plant breeding goals.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Oui.
Yes.
Moi, une des choses, comment dire, qu'est-ce qui me guide personnellement, c'est que j'ai commencé à faire de la sélection de plantes que j'aimais beaucoup. C'est des plantes qui m'étaient très utiles à ma production comme producteur maraîcher. Et qu'est-ce qui m'a fait évoluer par la suite? Ça a été quand j'ai voulu partager mes semences avec d'autres producteurs. Quand on veut partager des semences avec d'autres producteurs, on a un peu comme un contrat moral d'essayer de faire le mieux possible. Et c'est ce qui me stimule énormément. J'ai été chanceux parce que je connais pas mal d'autres producteurs au Québec et j'en ai eu quelques-uns qui m'ont encouragé à poursuivre la sélection. Ils ont aimé mon produit et c'est un peu comme, comment dire, on est parfois très sévère avec soi-même. Et le fait qu'il y ait l'appréciation des autres producteurs, c'est très encourageant. Alors, je pense que c'est très important que quelqu'un ne reste pas tout seul dans son coin et se bâtisse des réseaux avec les utilisateurs. C'est un peu ce que j'ai à dire. Je remercie beaucoup Aaron pour son commentaire qui est très encourageant. Et je pense que je reviens un peu à un commentaire de Michael. Parfois, sélectionner la semence, c'est assez vicieux, dans le sens qu'on devient, qu'est-ce que les Anglais vont dire, appelé addict. On commence ça, on ne sait pas quand on peut terminer. Je pense que c'est impossible de terminer. C'est une passion qui croît avec l'usage. C'est mon commentaire. Merci.
Merci, Richard. Thank you, Richard. Michael, how about you? There's just a few more minutes left. Do you want to share any advice for non-professional breeders, people who are starting and who want, might have limited resources, but not a lack of big ideas?
Sure. I would say that all of breeding, there's a whole, breeding is everything from, using greenhouses, even in labs, but all the way back to just doing selection, and as Chris was talking about with booth bees, is a lot of these varieties that have a variation within them of some. You can do a lot of selection, either for keeping them continuing from generation looking like what you want them to look like, or what they historically have looked like, or making them earlier, or even selecting for other traits like disease resistance and such. So you don't, depending on what your goals are, you don't necessarily have to bring in new variation by like crossing to a different cucumber like we did. And the book that you referenced, with Rowan White as the author, I don't know if someone can put that in the chat, is a great resource for how to start doing breeding projects, and has lots of different techniques, and some of them involve self-pollination, some of them involve recurrent selection. It talks about population sizes and things like that, so you can really find the right crop and the right project goals for what the resources that you do have.
And what's your personal record keeping tool?
And so it's changed over the years. I mean, here at Cornell, there's a lot more use of handheld computers and barcodes and things like that. But we were using simple note cards. There were 16 plants, and we had 1 through 16 written on there, and we were making notes on it, like white, long, short, black spines, white spines, powdery mildew resistance, tastes good, dead, things like that. And then we could go back after and look at those cards the next generation and go, plant 161-6 is the one we liked because it had all these good attributes. So there is that in its simplest form is very useful. You don't need to have lots of technology.
Thanks, Michael. So it's 11:30, so I think we're approaching the end of this session, and I would just reiterate what Solveig said, which is how open and collaborative the plant breeding community is, and whether it's through NOFA, through OSA, through online with open source seed initiative, looking at the list of breeders. So depending on which crop you're interested in, there's probably people working on this, and they would be so happy to share about their experience. Especially in the public plant breeding, there's some folks are close to retiring, so they're just so generous with their knowledge. Also getting to know your regional local organic farming community and talking with farmers there, because they might have bigger fields to do selection. They might have good ideas and know what to select for, but they're missing that seed saving and plant breeding step. I would ask Kristen if there's any kind of last information we want to share, other than you are all welcome to join the 2 p.m. and the 4 p.m. session on how to source germplasm, and start with good material, as well as the last mile, which is hitting the market with a new variety. Kristen, to you, any last comments?
I don't think so. We can leave this up. I know we blitzed you with links at the end here, so we can probably, Heron might confirm this, leave the window open just to make sure everyone has time to copy down what they need to. And again, maybe you can send the link of presentations again, just to bring it down the thread. But yeah, we hope to see you all at 2 p.m. to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I'll leave the frame open for a bit. Folks can copy the chat or just kind of gather some things. Also, just want to reference everybody, if you want to put an evaluation in about this session or any other session on the NOFA New York conference app, there's a eval process to do, just to let us know what you liked and other conversations you'd like to hear more about. So yes, looking forward to seeing y'all at 2 p.m. with Lori McKenzie from OSA, Lindsay Wyatt from Johnny Selected Seeds, and Nate Kleinman from Experimental Farm Network, talking about how to source and begin breeding projects. So We'll sit for about 30 seconds and then I'll end the meeting. So folks, give your best thanks and goodbyes to our amazing, talented presenters.
Thank you, Heron. You can stop the recording and